I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a regular guest. He's the author of 13 books. One of his latest books, or his latest book, is this: The Neoconservative Threat to World Order. Little spoiler alert: Dr. Paul Craig Roberts is the author of that. 13 others. His books are reprinted around the world. His columns are global. He has a huge resume, also, which includes a former Assistant Treasury Secretary, invented Reaganomics, which worked, by the way. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Well, Greg, it's always a pleasure speaking with you.
You told me to read this letter about Putin, and, because you're on the list of some 200 sites, and you wrote a very tongue-in-cheek letter to Vladimir Putin. Now that the CIA agent Greg Timberg, posing as a Washington Post reporter, has blown my cover and exposed me as a Russian agent, I was wondering if I might ask you for a Russian passport and a bit of diplomatic cover, perhaps assistant press officer for the Russian embassy in Washington, until I can get out of the country. I saw that you gave a passport to Steven Seagal, so I'm hopeful that being a Russian agent is as important as teaching martial arts to the Russians. You also talk about, you have 13 books, very serious books. I mean, here's the titles of one of the latest ones. They're all relative now, even though they might be out for a couple of years. The neoconservative threat to world order. And then here you tongue-in-cheek say that, perhaps you could also line me up with a publisher for my memoirs, My Life as a Putin Stooge, which, of course, is funny because you're not a Putin stooge and you can laugh at yourself and also the mainstream media. What do you think about, I got a tip off. What do you think about this, the whole idea that the Washington Post and others are calling sites like yours and Drudge and Breitbart and Zero Hedge, fake news sites?
Well, not just fake news sites. We're 200 websites financed by the Russian government. We're Russian agents. But of course, so is Donald Trump. He's also a Russian agent. Well, I think it's funny. I'm indebted to the imbeciles who, in an effort to discredit us, actually gave us a great deal of publicity and provided a list where people can go to find real news as opposed to the fake news that the prostitute media puts out. No one knows what this shadowy group is that came up with this list, and no one knows why the Washington Post would publicize it without telling anyone the source or who the people are. So I assume it was meant to be some kind of a hit attack on websites that challenge the propaganda that is delivered by the so-called prostitute press, by the TV networks, by the Washington Post and the New York Times. So they feel threatened quite clearly. The oligarchs who own the mainstream media, as it's called, the prostitutes, feel threatened. They no longer control the explanations because various polls show that far more Americans distrust the print and TV media than trust it. So as the internet spreads and people get used to accessing the information there, they are turning away from the New York Times and CNN and the rest, and finding different points of view. So this is a threat to the oligarchs. It's a threat to the neoconservatives because they have had a lock on foreign policy since the Clinton regime. They see that may now be threatened. And so this was some kind of a clumsy effort to brand us as somehow foreign agents spreading Russian propaganda. In other words, it's the same tactic that Israel uses against its critics. Anyone that criticizes the Israeli treatment of Palestinians is then put on a list of anti-Semitics. So if you criticize Israel, then it means you hate Jews. And so this effort that we're talking about, the 200, the list of 200, this is an effort to do the same thing. Oh, these people don't agree with the New York Times and CNN and with the Obama regime, and so they must be anti-American. In fact, we know they are because they're Russian apologists, they're Russian agents, and so on. I don't think it works. I would bet that the readership of these 200 websites has now gone greatly higher, it's increased. And it's a convenient list for people who want to find sources of alternative information.
The layoffs in the mainstream press are being forecast. They're already happening. That they're being killed. They're destroying. I've said this for last year that they're willing to destroy their whole business model by lying. I mean, that's the whole cornerstone of journalism, as a fair arbiter of the truth. And this is the cherry on top of the ice cream float. I mean, this is so bogus. They don't say who these people are, how they are. And then they make out like, oh, talking about Hillary Clinton being sick and that she committed treason. Oh, that's unbelievable. I mean, it's off the charts. I mean, then they read the book by Schweitzer Clinton Cash, which basically lays this out. I mean, they did. They reviewed it. They tried to discredit it, but they couldn't do it. But so you think this is a big turning point for media in general, for information in general?
Yeah, I think this was the death knell of the mainstream media. I think this list essentially kills the credibility of the mainstream media. Certainly the Washington Post has demonstrated it's completely devoid of any integrity. You'd have to be, I'm a former Wall Street Journal editor.
That's right.
And if we had done something like that, Warren Phillips would have fired every one of us. We've simply been told to get out. You can't carry on this kind of assault on people, I mean, and it's, I think, a sign of desperation. And it can't be effective because nobody knows who these people are. It's not like Edward R. Murrow has come out and accused us. It's people that nobody knows who they are, and if we did, they don't amount to anything. They're not people who've ever done anything, who have any kind of reputation. There's some kind of hirelings trying to fight back against the alternative news media, which has taken the audience away from newspapers and TV channels that only provide propaganda. Look, Greg, you know as well as I do, the media was destroyed when the Clinton regime permitted 6 mega corporations to purchase 90% of the American media.
That was the beginning of the end.
Yeah, that was the end, because, the tradition of the United States is a independent and dispersed media. There are thousands of news organizations. Now, if you can take 90% of those and put them into 6 corporate hands, you've destroyed the independence of the media, and that's what's happened. And so that's why.
And they did it. And they did this on purpose.
They did it on purpose. It is part of the oligarchy's clamp down on the people. They realized, these people will get upset because we've been making them economically worse off now for 30 years. They're going to get upset. We have to control them, so we got to be sure there's no media voice. We have to create all these enemies, and we have to have Homeland Security. And Homeland Security, we can start it out about the Muslim threat, but then we can change it over to domestic extremists. And who's a domestic extremist? It's a critic. So it was part of the device of American democracy, of American independence of people, and herding them into forms that they can control. So that's why the media was destroyed. Now, Clinton simply allowed them to destroy the media. And when you have the media stand up and say, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, and they know good and well he doesn't. And they can, so the Iranians have nukes, and they know good and well that they don't. And they say Assad used chemical weapons, and then know completely that he doesn't. And they say, oh, the Russians invade Ukraine, when no such invasion has taken place. Do you remember the news broadcast where the guy is on the news saying that, well, the reason we don't see any dead Russian soldiers is they have all these mobile crematoriums. And so as they invade Ukraine, they're burning all the bodies of the Russian soldiers killed in the invasion in these mobile crematoriums. Well, this is the kind of stuff they put on the news. Well, you know, really, I mean, how can anyone have any confidence in it? So I think that's where we are, that the news has been destroyed, and the only news is alternative on the internet, you know, and interviews like you produce, and websites that accumulate information from around the world, and other websites that, like mine, that put out analysis of what is actually going on. This has taken over.
I'll tell you, I'm a little sad to say that I didn't make the list. I was surprised. I mean, I've been saying Hillary's a traitor, that she used private servers to cover up her treason, that she has a global charity fraud, that there are no Syrian rebels. It's ISIS. I don't know what I have to do to get on the fake news list.
Well, you see, I think the reason is, Greg, for them to know what you're doing, they got to sit down and watch a 30-minute or an hour video. And they can't just watch one, they got to watch a whole bunch of them. And so to see what you're about, it takes a lot of time. You see what I mean? You'd have to sit and watch your videos. And clearly they were just trying to produce a list. Quick. Yeah, as quick as they could. And it's easy if you, like my site, you just go scan the headlines and read a few words, or they can just run one of these computer things looking for certain words. And they use those words to judge that, okay, this is the bad guy, and put you on the list. I don't think they know how to do that with videos. Maybe they do, but I suspect that's why you're not on the list, because when I saw it, I wondered where you were too. I said, why didn't Greg Hunter on this list? But I think that's the explanation.
Okay.
I don't think there's going to be any more lists, because they've been made. I've made fun of them, and other people have just damned them. A lot of serious journalists have just really damned them and come down on them very hard. I simply made fun of them.
I mean, I think well, just to wrap this up, and I want to move on to the economy and the treasury market, but I read this article and I thought, wow, one journalism mistake. I mean, high school journalism mistakes. I mean, who, what, when, what, when, where, why, who is doing this list? You're not going to tell me? What? I mean, the National Enquirer has I don't even want to put National Enquirer in the same space as them, because I don't want to make them look bad, because they have way better standards than the Washington Post, that owned by Jeff Bezos. I guess he's scared that Trump is going to do some antitrust against him, because he's hired a big antitrust guy in his cabinet. For Amazon. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, for those of you who don't know. But anyway, I digress. The media, they're on their way. They're on there with Gerald Celente, who I know is a friend of yours, says they're on their way out. They're dead. Cliff High says, wait until the layoffs reach a peak. You're going to see people whistleblowing on them. They're gonna come out and they're gonna air their dirty laundry out in public.
Yeah, they really don't have any journalists any longer. The few journalists they had, quit. I think we talked about it on one of your programs. You know, people have been there 20, 30 years, and they simply said, this isn't journalism anymore. I'm not having anything to do with it. You know, there was that woman, I forget her name, but you probably remember. She was a distinguished journalist and had many years of successful record. And one day she just said, I can't take it anymore. They don't print my stories. I have to write lies for them.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, I'm Cheryl Atkinson, I think, was the last investigative person.
And you know, Greg, they don't have any staff to do investigative reporting anymore. They're not capable of doing investigative reporting. They just don't have the staff. They won't commit the money to it. But they're really not permitted to do it. I mean, Jeff Bezos is not a journalist. When you see somebody like that owns what was once an important newspaper, no longer is, you have to wonder, what for? Why does he have that newspaper? I mean, she's not a journalist, and this is what's happened. The press is no longer in the hands of journalists. It's no longer run by journalists. It's run by former government officials and corporate advertising executives, or somebody like Jeff Bezos who bought a trophy, or maybe he needs it to protect his Amazon ventures. It doesn't make any real sense. They're not any Edward R. Murrows. And even the anchors, nobody knows who the anchors are. It's not like we used to have. People knew who Peter Jennings was.
Yeah.
Knew who Roger Mudd was. The anchors were well known, and many of them had a liberal bias, but they didn't stand up and tell you deliberate lies.
You are correct. That's right. You wouldn't know they had a liberal bias, but because they hid that. Everybody has a bias. But anyway, I digress. I want to talk about, and I want to get this in. The Treasury market is, and we talked about this in a pre-interview, and the stunning thing, and it's true. I mean, a lot of people have been looking for a crash, and boy, we sure got one the night that Donald Trump got elected, and 800 points down in the futures, and the turnaround was stunning. 900 points back up. I think it finished up 100 points up the following day. And everybody reported this like, oh, that was organic, natural. And, of course, we did get a crash. And then we got a huge intervention. And you told me in the pre-interview, we don't have markets, Greg. We don't have markets. Can we talk about that? Why this is being why so many people are getting the crash? Technically, we should have had a crash already. And is this why people are missing this? Is because of all the extreme fraud, criminality, and intervention?
Yes, the markets are all rigged. And so when you try to look at the markets from the standpoint of traditional ways, for example, price-earning ratios, or earnings growth, or sales growth, any kinds of things like this, they don't mean anything, because the Federal Reserve now has probably the largest trading desk in the world. They can trade anything, in fact, everything. And so and they have no limits on their pocketbook.
And nobody in the press brings any of this up. Nobody brings up the fact that the Fed has a huge, why are they nobody's even, it's hush. Silence. Nobody even asked Janet Yellen, hey, you got a big trading desk. What are you doing with that? Are you manipulating the markets?
See, why else would they have it, right? I mean, why would you have all of this capability if you weren't going to use it? Now, we know that they always traded in government bonds. And we did have reporting about quantitative easing. And all quantitative easing it's the Federal Reserve's purchase of bonds in order to drive the price up. Because the higher the price, the less the interest rate. And so they wanted to have zero interest rates in order to protect the balance sheets of the mega banks, the banks too big to fail. So we know that they can go in and buy as many bonds as they want because they can create as much money as they want. Well, if they can do that to bonds, they can do that to everything else, or they can sell. They can drive things down by selling or by having their agents. For example, the big banks too big to fail, these are the bullion banks that the Fed can use to disrupt the gold market or the bullion markets, gold and silver market. So we've talked about it before that in order to protect the dollar's exchange value from the massive outpouring of dollars that the Fed created to buy all the bonds, they had to stop the dollar falling with relation to gold. So they would go in and sell massive amounts of naked shorts in the gold futures market. And this is how they knocked the gold price down. So if the stock market starts falling for some reason, some real reason, all the Fed has to do is go buy S&P futures. It goes back up. So, in fact, they don't really have to do a whole lot because all the money they pumped out into the banking system. If you're a bank and you can borrow at 25 basis points and you can go buy a dividend stock paying 2 or 3%, you're making a huge sum of money on just the arbitrage. So a lot of the money that the Fed gave the banks for their bonds, the banks just say, hey, look, we get this money for nothing, and yet we can buy stocks with dividends, and they pay 2 or 3%. So this type of arbitrage works even without direct Fed interference. So the markets aren't there. When you try to say, oh, the market this, the market that, it's gone. The market's gone. There's the Fed. And the Fed has the whole system rigged. And it seems that they can keep it rigged. We've talked about it before. This surprised me, the level of interference like this, because I would have thought this would be strictly illegal, certainly not appropriate to have a central bank simply cancel out the financial markets and place its own judgment there in lieu of what would be market decisions. But that's what's happened. And unless the world runs on the dollar, that is, unless the rest of the world just abandons the dollar, I can't see anything that would bring down this house of cards. They can continue this because the Fed can create all the money it wants. There's no limit on the Fed's ability to create money. So they can absorb endless losses. It doesn't, in fact, it doesn't mean anything to the Fed to have a loss.
Do you think they might be holding this economy over Donald Trump's head? We talked a little bit about that in the pre-interview. You said, I said, wow, the 10-year Treasury from Halloween was 1.80, and it shot up to 2.3 something. It's up in that area, which is a huge move, as you know, because you have a PhD in economics. But you said, well, they could just be holding this over his head. They may crush the economy if they can't get him to do what they want him to do. Will you explain that for us a little bit?
Well, the easiest thing for the oligarchs to do would be to orchestrate an economic crash. And they can do it easily because it's a house of cards held up by the Fed. Now, if they come to the conclusion that they can't control Trump and that he actually is a threat to them in some way, they'll just crash the economy, and then they'll go to Trump and say, hey, look, you're blamed for this. You're on the defensive. You want to get out of this, you have to appoint us. And we'll get you out of it. So that's the sort of power that the oligarch has over Trump. I think, I've said from the beginning that he has sort of the temperament and strong will that you have to bring change from the top down. But he lacks the knowledge, he lacks the experience. He doesn't know who the people are to a point that he can trust. And so he's kind of a babe in their hands. And if they are unable to control him through the appointments, they always have the option of sending the economy down and then telling him, okay, we've got you. Now, if you want it fixed, put us in. So
I don't know if he's going to go quietly. I don't know if he's going to do what he's very unpredictable. And he's not stupid. I mean, he did graduate from Wharton Business School. He's not a dumb guy. But I mean, you're talking about a level that is, you saw this in the Reagan administration, so people know you were in the Reagan administration. And one of the things you said to me was, explain this for me. They tried to destroy us every day. This is you working for Ronald Reagan. Explain that.
Well, Reagan took the nomination away from the Republican establishment. He took it away from George Herbert Walker Bush, just as Goldwater had taken it away from Rockefeller. Now, you remember what happened to Goldwater? He got trounced, and the reason was when he won the nomination away from the Republican establishment, he did not pick Rockefeller as his vice president. He ignored them. And so the Republican establishment turned on him and worked against him in the election. And so he lost by a huge margin to LBJ. Well, Reagan was told, okay, remember what happened to Goldwater, now you have to take Bush.
He became the vice president. The most powerful vice president in history, I might add. Covertly.
Former CIA director, well-connected. And so what the Republican establishment really wants is to control the party. It doesn't want to lose control of the party to outsiders like Ronald Reagan or Jack Kemp. They want to be sure they maintain control. That's what's important to them, not the policy. I don't think they particularly cared what Reagan's policy was. They might care if some of their friends cared, but they just wanted to control the party. And so they had to carry on against the Reagan people to be sure that Reagan didn't have so much success that the mantle would pass to another outsider. And so you may remember at the time, the Republican establishment all claimed credit for Reagan's success. They said he would have failed, but we came in and moderated him. And it was our moderation of Reagan that made his presidency successful.
Brought the economy back and into the Cold War, a couple of big ones.
Yeah, but their line is they were responsible because they moderated him.
Yeah.
So this is a trouble. When remember what happened to Jimmy Carter? He was kind of an outsider in the Democratic Party. And so what they did to him, they started on his appointees. They framed up his budget director, Bert Lance. They framed up his chief of staff, Hamilton Jordan. and once they get their people in there, then the president is captured. What's he going to do? He's dependent on the information flows that come to him, and so if he doesn't have his people there, he can't have his policies.
And you think that's fast forward to today? So you think that's what's going to happen with Trump, or that is happening with Trump?
I think it's very likely. Now, Trump is different in the sense that he's a very strong-willed person, and he's certainly willing to fire people and to run over them. But still, in order to do that, you've got to have some kind of support. You've got to have some kind of team. And not being a Washington player and not knowing who the players are in any substantive sense, he's kind of at loss who to appoint. And as he himself said, he sounded a bit dismayed. He said, you may remember, there's nobody to appoint but the insiders. And that's right. The people who get appointed generally are the ones who have been there a long time because they look for experience. They look for somebody who knows this and that and so on. And so you get stuck with the same kind of people. Now, it's possible that under Trump, the current will change, and many insiders themselves don't really have ideological programs or agendas. They go along to get along. So if he can avoid ideologues like the neoconservatives, and he can avoid the more powerful of the private interest groups from getting in powerful positions, and just use ordinary insiders, they may go along with Trump, and he may actually be able to do something.
We're better than Hillary Clinton. Trump is going to be way better than Hillary Clinton, or am I wrong?
I think he's better in two senses. One, he said he's not interested in conflict with Russia. And so this is the most important thing, because what the Obama regime had done more or less convinced the Russians that we were going to attack them. When you constantly demonize a country like we did to Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, Assad, we end up attacking them. And so here the Russians experiencing the same thing. We're telling all these lies about the Russians. We're infusing all this fear in Europe of Russians. It sounds like the United States is preparing its population for war with Russia, and that's the way the Russians will look at it. And so they started putting in motion their responses. Well, this type of thing becomes very dangerous.
Yeah.
So Trump says he's not going to do that. So we'll see. If he doesn't, then that alone is worth him being elected, because Hillary was all for aggression toward Russia.
She was for nuclear first strike, and Trump said in the debate he's not, which he got painted as some crazy guy for not wanting to drop bombs first.
Right. And she's calling the Russian president the new Hitler. And so that's, I think, if Trump simply normalizes relations with Russia, he was worth electing. And the other thing he said, which Hillary doesn't support, is that something has to be done to bring back the good middle-class jobs that Americans used to have. Well, Hillary's too much a creature of Wall Street and the global corporations to want to deny them the cheap foreign labor that they use to make the products that they sell to Americans. And so this is why there's been no growth in American median family income for 30 years. And they've taken all the wages that were paid in middle-class jobs and located the production offshore and paid foreigners very, very low salaries and put the difference in their pockets. This is the reason the income distribution is so huge, so bad, so wrong. Because what were middle-class wages and salaries, this is now executive performance bonuses and capital gains to shareholders. So that's what's worsened the distribution of income. I get amused at liberals and progressives and left-wing people, and they think that the distribution of income is somehow a reflection of tax cuts. No, it's not. It's a reflection of wage cuts from offshoring the jobs. So even when the liberals and the progressives and the left wing, they can't even get their minds around the real problem. But I was pleased to see that Trump understood that. So if he can do something about that as well, then he will have proven to be a godsend. You know, anybody who can stop nuclear tensions and can restore middle-class jobs, who cares what else he does? It's just not important.
A few Supreme Court appointments, and wow, nirvana. I want to just close with one last thing. And so people, and coming from you, because you're a huge brainiac, and I don't mean to, you are. I mean, come on, you got a PhD in economics. You worked in the Reagan administration. You have a huge career. You're globally known. You know, I mean, you winning awards in foreign countries for what you're doing now. So I'm glossing over your resume. I mean, it's big. But anyway, I digress. Would you be a holder of gold, people, and silver? Would you be holding that in case, you know, the powers that be, the brainiacs, the unbrainiacs, you know, the neocons, you know, zig when they should have zagged and the thing blows up, or they blow it up on purpose? Would you be a holder of gold and silver in this environment? Because
Yes.
nothing is good about what's going on. I mean, what they're doing is crazyville.
Right. Yes, if anyone has any kind of surplus funds, they really should have some gold and silver, because the dollar, it should be reduced already to the level of toilet paper. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet has exploded. It's grown so much, but not the production. So you have this massive increase in the supply of money, but not in goods and services. And the reason we are not experiencing hyperinflation is the money hasn't, not much of that money, got into the economy. It got into financial assets. It bid up stock prices and bond prices and real estate prices, particularly in resort-like areas. So, yeah, sure, because if the world turns on the dollar,
and it could,
the Fed's not going to be able to sustain it. And gold and silver have always been money. They've always been the basis of money. And if people don't want the currency because it's worthless, it's nice to have something to engage and trade with until some new monetary system can be formed. I think that it's very reckless to abuse the dollar the way it has been abused. And it's only possible because the dollar has this long tradition since World War II of being the world reserve currency. So it has a following. People are kind of stuck in it because that was the world money. And it doesn't just go from being world money to not being world money because it's being abused. It takes time. It takes realization. It takes some sort of write-off of the United States. And that's what we've been working toward. We've been working toward having the world write us off because of all the wars, 15 years of wars, trillions of dollars squandered. For what? What purpose? What's been achieved? And Putin asks us these questions, and nobody ever answers them. Well, what did you do all this for? Don't you remember his statement a couple years ago? Do you realize what you've done? No, they don't realize it. And that's why they keep doing it. And we got to see whether Trump can stop it. And if he can't form a government consisting of people that will support him, he can't do anything. The president is one person. The oligarchy are many, many. And they're very powerful. And so, whereas Trump has the kind of personality that could do something, he still has to have support. And this, I think, Greg, is why I'm disappointed that so many left-wing people have decided to jump on him, along with the liberals and the progressives, because the more you're jumped on, the less you listen to any criticism. And so if you can't get good criticism because he's just jumped on by everybody, that makes it easy for the neocons to say, we support you. And so I think what's happening, the danger that we face is the liberals, the progressives, the left wing, who are so busy beating up on him 24 hours a day that the neocons, that suits them perfect. And they'll go to Trump and say, well, you know, we support you. We'll help you. And then nothing can change. They'll get in there. We'll continue these wars for hegemony. We'll be back into conflict with the Russians and the Chinese. and Trump will be defeated. So I think that all of this beating up on him, trying to delegitimize him before he's ever inaugurated, that this is a way of helping the neocons maintain power. So I think the left wing and liberals and the progressives are behaving foolishly, extremely foolishly. They should support him and hold his feet to the fire on the important issues. And if he fails or sells out the people, then they can jump on him. But I think this is premature, and it makes it easy for the neocons to worm their way in. And in that case, there won't be any change.
Paul Craig Roberts, I got to tell you, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, I got to tell you, I really appreciate you coming on and enlightening us and showing your brain off here on USAWatchdog.com. You're a 13-time published author. I'm going to put up your homepage and also your book buying page. This is one of the latest, but it's as relevant now. So is your other top 3 or 4 books. They're all relevant. They're printed in multiple languages, including English. This is the neoconservative threat to the world order, which you just talked a lot about. And it's totally relevant, and you lived through it in the Reagan administration. I really appreciate you coming on. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Always a pleasure, Greg. In an effort to discredit us, actually gave us a great deal of publicity and provided a list where people can go to find real news as opposed to the fake news that the prostitute media puts out. No one knows what this shadowy group is that came up with this list, and no one knows why the Washington Post would publicize it without telling anyone the source or who the people are. So I assume it was meant to be some kind of a hit attack on websites that challenge the propaganda that is delivered by the so-called prostitute press, by the TV networks, by the Washington Post and the New York Times. So they feel threatened quite clearly. The oligarchs who own the mainstream media, as it's called, the prostitutes, feel threatened. They no longer control the explanations because various
is as important as teaching martial arts to the Russians. You also talk about, you have 13 books, very serious books. I mean, here's the titles of one of the latest ones. They're all relative now, even though they might be out for a couple of years. The neoconservative threat to world order. And then here you tongue-in-cheek say that, perhaps you could also line me up with a publisher for my memoirs, My Life as a Putin Stooge, which, of course, is funny because you're not a Putin stooge and you can laugh at yourself and also the mainstream media. What do you think about, I got a tip off. What do you think about this, the whole idea that the Washington Post and others are calling sites like yours and Drudge and Breitbart and Zero Hedge, fake news sites?
Well, not just fake news sites. We're 200 websites financed by the Russian government. We're Russian agents. But of course, so is Donald Trump. He's also a Russian agent. Well, I think it's funny. I'm indebted to the imbeciles who if you criticize Israel, then it means you hate Jews. And so this effort that we're talking about, the list of 200, this is an effort to do the same thing. Oh, these people don't agree with the New York Times and CNN and with the Obama regime, and so they must be anti-American. In fact, we know they are because they're Russian apologists, they're Russian agents, and so on. I don't think it works. I would bet that the readership of these 200 websites has now gone greatly higher, it's increased. And it's a convenient list for people who want to find sources of alternative information.
The layoffs in the mainstream press are being forecast. They're already happening. That they're being killed. They're destroying. I've said this for last year that they're willing to destroy their whole business model by lying. I mean, that's the whole cornerstone of journalism, as a fair arbiter of the truth. I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a regular guest. He's the author of 13 books. One of his latest books, or his latest book, is this: The Neoconservative Threat to World Order. Little spoiler alert: Dr. Paul Craig Roberts is the author of that. 13 others. His books are reprinted around the world. His columns are global. He has a huge resume, also, which includes a former Assistant Treasury Secretary, invented Reaganomics, which worked, by the way. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Well, Greg, it's always a pleasure speaking with you.
You told me to read this letter about Putin, and, because you're on the list of some 200 sites, and you wrote a very tongue-in-cheek letter to Vladimir Putin. Now that the CIA agent Greg Timberg, posing as a Washington Post reporter, has blown my cover and exposed me as a Russian agent, I was wondering if I might ask you for a Russian passport and a bit of diplomatic cover, perhaps assistant press officer for the Russian embassy in Washington, until I can get out of the country. I saw that you gave a passport to Steven Seagal, so I'm hopeful that being a Russian agent...
Polls show that far more Americans distrust the print and TV media than trust it. So as the internet spreads and people get used to accessing the information there, they are turning away from the New York Times and CNN and the rest, and finding different points of view. So this is a threat to the oligarchs. It's a threat to the neoconservatives, because they have had a lock on foreign policy since the Clinton regime. They see that may now be threatened. And so this was some kind of a clumsy effort to brand us as somehow foreign agents spreading Russian propaganda. In other words, it's the same tactic that Israel uses against its critics. Anyone that criticizes the Israeli treatment of Palestinians is then put on a list of anti-Semitics. So if